On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, what are the 7 things to watch regarding the 2024 container supply chain situation? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So there's a series of articles out by Container News, really thought-provoking. I want to go over them, talk about them, and then summarize those 7 things that they mention I think you should be watching regarding the supply chain situation regarding containers. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, the first of the series of articles is this one right here. Red Sea crisis changes container shipping from glut to tightness. So we've talked about this a lot, the fact that going into 2024, the container market, particularly the shipping companies, had too much capacity and their freight rates were dropping perilously low. They were back to basically pre-COVID levels. Well, that's not the case anymore. If you look at the latest from Drewry's, we've seen that fall of those rates from the peak back there in late 2021, 2020, early 2022 to stabilizing, but now we've seen the fastest growth in 1 week of freight rates. Rates they're showing here from China to the Mediterranean, basically Shanghai to Genoa, have jumped almost 3 to 4 times, up over $5,000 for a box, which makes sense because now you can't take that shortcut through the Red Sea and the Suez to get right there into the Mediterranean. Instead, you have to take the longest diversion around, and then even the Shanghai to New York run has jumped up tremendously. We've seen that increase up to over $4,000 a box. It was right around $3,000. So we're seeing all the freight rates taking these big jumps. Next, BIMCO reported that record deliveries could push the container fleet above 30 million TEUs in 2024. In other words, the fleet will have over the capacity to carry over 30 million 20-foot equivalent units. And if you look at shipbuilding over the past decade, you'll see why. We're about to see the biggest influx of ships coming online here in 2024 and 2025. Notice at the bottom of that graph, you'll see ships that are being recycled, scrapped. Almost no ships have been recycled in 2021, 2022 because everything that was floating was being used in the container market. Well, now we're starting to see them phase out because of environmental and emissions issues. But now we're seeing that fleet grow. We're looking at over 3 million TEUs of capacity coming online. We're looking at a growth of over 10% of the fleet. These ships, much larger. We're talking about Neo-Panamax vessels, ships that can go through that new lane of the Panama Canal, ships that can be used in a variety of different services, but most importantly, much more fuel efficient, which is a really important thing with the implementation of new rules under IMO 2023. Next, this story, January Global Shipping Report by Descartes Data. Now, Descartes, great firm, puts out lots of great data. This article breaks it down from Descartes. I want to show you some of the charts, and then we're going to talk about those 7 things to be watching for. So one of the big ones is we finally have the year-end report about U.S. container import volumes. The orange there represents 2023, and you'll see December falls midway between the last 4 years. Below it is 2022 and 2019. Above it is 2020 and 2021. So as part of an overall kind of charting what you're looking at here, since February, 2023 has been on an uptick. We had a drop from October to November, but that always happens. We always see that drop. And then what we saw was a slight uptick from November to December. The only time you saw that previously was back in 2020 at the very beginning of COVID. 2019 was pretty flat in this period. If you go to the beginning of this chart, notice what happens from January down into February. This is that Q1 drop we always see. This is the period after the Christmas holiday and before the Chinese New Year kicks in. So we usually see that drop. The question is going to be, what does that drop look like coming out of February into March? Will it mimic 2021 and 2022, where we saw that big, huge uptick? Will it follow 2020 and 2019 with a decrease, or is 2023 the new norm? If you look at the ports change from November to December, seeing a little bit of a decrease on the West Coast. The LA and Long Beach are down about 20 to 29,000 TEU. Same thing there for Tacoma, whereas the East Coast and Gulf Coast just a little bit up there. We're seeing an overall increase of the top 10 ports by 0.3%. This chart talks about the relative TEU container import volume, taking January 2022 as the 100% mark. So if you look at U.S. import volumes, we're about 85% of where we were in January of 2022. If you look at China import volumes, we're about 80%. Going to country of origin, again, this is the change from November to December you're looking at here. We've seen a reduction in the imports coming from India, from Germany, from Hong Kong, and Japan. I think the India one is really significant because we're seeing the impact there of some of the beginning of the disruptions happening in and around the Red Sea with containers not able to get to their destinations as quickly as before. We're going to see a much more significant change, I think, when you look at January and February numbers. If you look at U.S. container import volumes, a couple of things on this chart really stands out. Number one, top 10 U.S. ports account for about 85% of all the containers coming into the United States. And notice what has been happening between the West Coast ports and the East Coast, Gulf Coast ports. West Coast ports are orange. The East and Gulf Coast ports are in blue. The East and Gulf Coast ports have been, since 2017, taking more and more volume from the West Coast. That changed a bit when we saw COVID hit, but then it resumed. Now we're seeing them kind of flip back and forth, and you'll see there's been a lot of changes in leads here between the two. Right now, the East and Gulf Coast ports are up, the West Coast ports are down, but I think that's going to change between the dual issues of the low water level in the Panama Canal and then what's happening in and around the Red Sea with the Houthi. This shows you transit delays coming in, how long are ships waiting to get in and offload. You'll see some delays coming in on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey in particularly, but basically the other ports are decreasing, the exception being Houston right now, but the West Coast is starting to see some transit delays coming in. This shows you Gulf Coast container imports. Notice that drop from October to November, a significant drop. That coincides with the beginning of the Panama Canal issues that we saw, major reductions in the number of ships coming in, and then the adjustment of schedules going into the United States, trying to minimize number of ports in. So we saw that reduce, but then we saw an uptick in the number of ships coming through, some load changes in the Panama Canal, and we saw those numbers kick back up again. So let's go to the 7 issues that you should be thinking about according to container news coming in. I think these risks are really well thought out. I agree with them. I'm going to add some more to what is here than that. So the first one, monthly TEU volumes should be between 2.4 to 2.6 million. That should continue across. I kind of agree with that. I think we are not seeing the reduction in the number of imported containers coming in. You'll hear a lot about a freight recession in terms of trucking and rail, but that is separate from the number of containers. One of the things that happened in the trucking market, for example, is a lot of people jumped into the trucking market in the COVID, and now you're cleaning out a lot of those companies that came in, small little companies that came in because there's not a lot of regulation and ability to get money at the time to start up a trucking firm. That's a bit different now. Port transit wait times, if they decrease, it's an indication of improved global supply chain efficiencies. I don't think you're going to see that. Matter of fact, I think because of the disruptions we're seeing out of the Panama Canal and the Red Sea, those port transit wait times are going to increase. And the longer it takes you to get to the ports, to get there, this is going to cause problems. Continuing impact of the pandemic. I know none of us want to think about that, but understand U.S., Western nations, Japan, Korea, Europe, all those countries have had access to different forms of inoculation and vaccines. Not everyone around the planet has. And so we can still see the impact of pandemic shutting down ports, particularly in Asia, China, Vietnam, some other areas. Any new variants could cause problems. And the question is, how do those countries deal with those issues when they come to bear? Next in here that we see is the economy. U.S. is import driven, so obviously economic health is a real big important. What happens with borrowing rates? What happens with the Fed deciding to change that? I think what's happening in and around the Red Sea is going to impact inflation. Goods are going to get more expensive. When you go back to those freight rates, I think you're going to see that indicated in the cost of goods. And if you start seeing inflation going up, then the Fed may start changing their interest rates and start trying to slow down the economy a bit. All of that could have a big flow in the amount of containers coming in and the movement of them. Panama Canal-based trade flow. All right, right now, the water level on Gatun Lake is lower than where the water level on average is during the height of the dry season. We're at the height of the wet season. And so we've got 5-6 months of dry, going to the dry season, which means lake levels are going to get even lower. Question I have is, what is the Panama Canal doing to conserve? There's a lot of issues about, are they reducing water usage going through the locks? I'm not sure we're seeing that right now. My brother just did a cruise on board Ruby Princess. They came in on the Atlantic side, went up onto Gatun Lake, and then came right back out again. That seems like a huge waste of water right there, just for a cruise ship to go up onto the lake and back down. They didn't even transit through, just halfway through. But they pay a lot of money to do that, and the Panama Canal will take that. Now, Panama Canal is doing a lot to improve water supply situation, but will they be able to maintain it? We've already seen Maersk announce they're going to start putting containers ashore on the Pacific side, rail them across, and load them back on the Atlantic side to get larger ships through. All of this is going to be a big issue here. The Mideast conflict, man, I don't know what the Houthi are going to do. We just had an attack this morning on a bulker heading through an Eagle ship. This is a U.S.-owned Marshall Island flag vessel, the Gibraltar Eagle, coming through. If you all of a sudden start seeing LNG tankers, fuel tankers, oil tankers, and potentially bulk ships start avoiding around, not exactly sure this improves the situation. And depending on how that transpires, we just don't know. And then the one variable, like, we didn't need this again on the radar. You'll remember last year where over the past few years we had the issue with the ILWU. This is the International Longshore Warehouse Union on the West Coast. Well, now it's the International Longshore Association on the East Coast. They are in the midst of a contract negotiations. All of this is going to culminate with hopefully a decision just before the presidential election in the United States. If that doesn't happen, you're looking at potential slowdown, strikes, issues on the East Coast of the United States. So there is nothing clean and clear about what is happening with container supply chain right now. Those 7 points raised by Container News, absolutely essential articles. I'll have the links of all those articles down below for you to take a look at. You need to stay abreast of this if you're a shipper and if you're a consumer, so you know why all of a sudden you're seeing spikes in trade. Understand, the container liners that are going around Africa from Europe, 35% of that cargo that's on those ships comes to the United States. Because that cargo isn't coming through the Panama Canal because of low water levels. If you don't know about your maritime choke points, you need to learn about maritime choke points, because this is impacting how goods cost for you in the grocery store, manufacturing goods, finished produced goods. All of this is because of what we're seeing happening right now in the container market. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit the super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and you can become a monthly, yearly subscriber. So our next video, this is Sal signing off.